Montana Territory, 1878. The summer sun beat down on the rolling plains of the Powder River Basin, where the tall grass swayed like an endless golden sea. In this untamed wilderness, where only the hardiest souls dared stake their claims, 25-year-old Andrew Thorne had learned one truth above all others. A man who lets down his guard ends up dead. He adjusted his well-worn Stetson against the glare as his horse picked its way along the bank of a shallow creek. 7 years working cattle had taught him that sentiment was a luxury no cowhand could afford. Men who formed attachments got soft, made mistakes, and the unforgiving frontier made them pay. Better to ride alone, take your wages, and never look back. You are a nomad by nature, his father had told him before consumption took him when Andrew was 17. That is both your gift and your curse. Andrew believed it. The endless horizon called to him, and he had never stayed more than a season at any outfit. Each time a rancher offered permanent work, he'd politely decline. The thought of being tied to one spread made his chest tighten with a strange panic. He had witnessed too many good men broken by the land they tried to tame. The frontier wasn't a place for setting roots, it was a place for surviving. And so he drifted from Texas to Wyoming, Colorado to Montana. He'd hired on with the Rocking M Ranch 3 months back, long enough to help with spring calving and cattle drives. Now with summer in full swing, the familiar itch had returned. Time to collect his pay and move on. Andrew's sorrel gelding snorted, ears pricking forward, pulling him from his thoughts. Around the bend of the creek, a woman knelt at the water's edge, filling a wooden bucket. Her honey-blonde hair was tied loosely at the nape of her neck, and her simple blue dress was hitched up slightly to keep the hem dry. He slowed his horse, not wanting to startle her. "Afternoon, miss." She looked up, shielding her eyes against the sun. For a moment she seemed caught off guard, then composed herself with remarkable quickness. "Good afternoon." Her voice carried clearly over the gurgling of the stream. Andrew touched the brim of his hat respectfully. "Andrew Thorne, ma'am. I ride for the Rocking M." "Amelia Kincaid," she replied, standing with fluid grace. "My father's homestead is just over that rise." She gestured toward a gentle hill to the east. He estimated she was about 22, with clear blue eyes that regarded him with neither fear nor flirtation, just calm assessment. Her skin had the sun-kissed quality of someone who worked outdoors, but maintained a feminine softness that stood out in this harsh country. "You're a fair piece from the Rocking M," she observed. "That's Peterson land you're crossing." Andrew nodded. "Mr. Peterson and Mr. McAllister have an agreement about water rights. I'm checking the creek levels for the boss." "Of course," she lifted her bucket. "Would you care for a drink? The water's sweet here." Common courtesy dictated he accept, though he wasn't particularly thirsty. He dismounted, leading his horse to drink while he cupped his hands in the cool stream. "You're new to these parts," Amelia said. It wasn't a question. "Been with the Rocking M since March." He straightened, wiping his hands on his denims. "And how long will you stay?" Her directness surprised him. Andrew found himself answering honestly. "Not much longer, I expect. Thinking of heading east, maybe Nebraska way. Heard they're hiring good hands for trail drives." A slight frown crossed her features, there and gone so quickly he might have imagined it. She hefted her bucket. "Well, Mr. Thorne, if you're not in a hurry, my father would welcome you for supper. We don't get much news out here." The invitation was unexpected. Andrew had a policy of avoiding social entanglements, especially with unmarried women. Nothing complicated a man's life faster than a father with marriage on his mind, but something in her manner, practical, without pretense, made him nod. "That's mighty kind." "I'd be obliged." They walked in companionable silence, his horse following behind. As they crested the hill, a neat homestead came into view, a solidly built cabin with a stone chimney, a small barn, and several well-tended fields. Smoke curled from the chimney and chickens scratched in a fenced yard. "It ain't much," Amelia said, "but it's ours free and clear." "Looks like good land," Andrew commented, genuinely impressed by the orderliness of the place. Most homesteaders he'd encountered lived in sod houses or ramshackle shelters, but the Kincaids had built something substantial. The door to the cabin opened, and a tall man with a graying beard emerged, rifle in hand. His stance relaxed when he spotted his daughter. "Pa," Amelia called, "we have a visitor. This is Mr. Thorne from the Rocking M." Thomas Kincaid had the weathered look of a man who had spent decades under open skies. He extended a calloused hand. Any rider of McAllister's is welcome at our table. The interior of the cabin revealed the same careful attention to detail as the outside. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its mantel adorned with a few precious books. The furniture was simple but well crafted, and bright quilt work added color. The place had the unmistakable feel of a home, not merely shelter. As Amelia moved confidently around the kitchen area, Andrew found himself studying her. There was a purposeful efficiency to her movements, a quiet strength. Unlike the giggling girls at town dances or the hard-eyed women in saloons, she carried herself with a dignity that commanded respect. Over a meal of rabbit stew and fresh bread, Thomas Kincade proved to be surprisingly well-informed about the territory. McAllister mentioned he hired on some new hands this spring, the older man remarked. Says you're one of the best horsemen he's seen. Andrew shifted uncomfortably at the praise. I've spent most of my life in the saddle. Where's home for you? Thomas asked. Born in Kentucky, Andrew replied. Haven't really had a fixed place since I was 17. A wandering man, Thomas observed without judgment. Yes, sir, seems to suit me. Amelia, who had been quiet through much of the meal, spoke up. There's nothing wrong with putting down roots, Mr. Thorne. Even wild horses need a home range. Something in her tone made him look at her more carefully. Their eyes met briefly before she returned her attention to her plate. As darkness fell, Thomas excused himself to check on a mare about to foal, leaving Andrew and Amelia alone at the table. An awkward silence settled between them. Your father built a fine place here, Andrew finally said. We built it together, she corrected gently. After Mother died, it was just the two of us. I was 14 when we came west. That couldn't have been easy for a young girl. She shrugged. The frontier doesn't much care if you're young or female. The work needs doing all the same. She began gathering the dishes. Would you mind fetching more water from the well? Outside, the Montana night had transformed into a canopy of brilliant stars. Andrew filled the bucket, pausing to look up at the vast expanse. He'd spent countless nights under these same stars, finding comfort in their constancy as he moved from place to place. When he returned, Amelia was standing by the fireplace, gazing at something in her hand. She quickly slipped it into her pocket as he entered. Thank you, she said, taking the water. Your boss mentioned you might be moving on soon. Word travels fast, Andrew commented. It's a small community despite the distances. She poured the water into a basin. Where will you go next? East, most likely. Nebraska, maybe all the way to Missouri. She paused in her work, her back to him. I would ask you not to ride east, Mr. Thorne. The request caught him completely off guard. Ma'am. Amelia turned, her expression composed but serious. I said I would ask you not to ride east. Andrew stared at her, perplexed. May I ask why? Before she could answer, the door opened and Thomas returned, looking pleased. Healthy filly, he announced. Black as midnight with 4 white socks. He glanced between them, sensing the tension. Everything all right. Just fine, Pa, Amelia assured him. I was telling Mr. Thorne about the trouble east of here. Thomas's expression darkened. Ah, yes, the Wallace gang has been raiding homesteads along the eastern border. 3 families driven out in the last month. Andrew frowned. I hadn't heard. McAllister's land is far enough west that he's not too concerned, Thomas explained. But for smaller spreads like ours, it's a real threat. He moved to a cabinet and removed a bottle of whiskey and 3 glasses. They say Wallace has 20 men riding with him now. As they sipped whiskey, Thomas elaborated on the danger. The Wallace gang had started as cattle rustlers, but had graduated to intimidating homesteaders, burning out those who resisted, claiming their improved land for larger interests back east. The territorial marshal is supposedly on his way, Thomas concluded, but who knows when he'll arrive or if he'll do any good. Andrew listened intently. He'd encountered plenty of outlaws in his travels, but mostly avoided their territories. A man riding alone stayed clear of trouble when possible. That's why I suggested you might not want to head east, Amelia said quietly, at least not until things settle. The evening concluded with Thomas offering Andrew the use of their barn for the night, which he gratefully accepted. As he made a bed in the clean hay, Andrew found himself puzzled by Amelia's concern for his welfare. They were strangers, after all. Yet something in her manner suggested a genuine worry that went beyond casual acquaintance. Dawn broke with the clamor of roosters and the lowing of cattle. Andrew emerged from the barn to find Amelia already at work in the garden, her hair gleaming in the early light. "You're an early riser," he commented, approaching the rough fence that surrounded her vegetable patch. "No choice on a homestead," she replied, brushing soil from her hands as she stood. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than most nights on the trail." She smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face. "Breakfast will be ready soon. Pa's gone to check the north pasture." Over a hearty meal of eggs and biscuits, Andrew found himself sharing stories of his travels, tales he rarely told anyone. Amelia listened attentively, asking intelligent questions about places she'd never seen. "You've lived quite a life," she said when he finished describing a cattle drive through a freak snowstorm in Colorado. "Always moving, always free." "It has its advantages," he agreed, "and its costs, I imagine." Her perception was unsettling. No place to call home, no one waiting for your return. Andrew set down his fork. "Miss Kincaid, I get the feeling you're trying to make a point." She met his gaze directly. "Perhaps I am. I've known men like you before, Mr. Thorne, men who mistake motion for freedom." Her words struck uncomfortably close to something he'd never articulated, even to himself. Before he could formulate a response, hoofbeats sounded outside. Thomas Kincaid burst through the door, his face grim. "Riders coming," he said tersely, 5 of them heavily armed. Amelia paled but moved with swift efficiency, retrieving a rifle from above the fireplace. Andrew stepped to the window, peering through the curtain. 5 men approached at a steady pace, their manner suggesting confidence rather than caution. "Wallace's men?" he asked. Thomas nodded. "Led by his right hand, Sela's drum." "Mean as they come." Andrew considered his options. This wasn't his fight. The smart play would be to slip out the back, mount up, and be long gone before trouble erupted. That's what he'd always done, avoid entanglements, stay alive to ride another day. But something held him in place. Maybe it was the quiet dignity of this father and daughter, prepared to defend their home against overwhelming odds. Or maybe it was the way Amelia's earlier words had needled him, suggesting his wandering was less about freedom and more about fear. "Mr. Kincaid," he said, "I'm a fair hand with a gun if you'll have my help." Relief and gratitude flashed across the older man's face. "Gladly accepted." The riders halted about 30 yards from the house. A heavy-set man with a drooping mustache called out, "Kincaid, we need to talk." Thomas opened the door but remained in the threshold. "Say your piece, Drum." "Mr. Wallace has made a generous offer for your land," Drum announced. $500, which is more than fair considering the circumstances." "And what circumstances would those be?" Thomas's voice was level, but Andrew could see the tension in his stance. Drum gestured expansively. "Times are changing. This land's going to be open for proper development soon. Small operations like yours can't compete. Mr. Wallace is being neighborly, offering you a chance to leave with something in your pocket." "This land is homesteaded, legal and proper," Thomas replied. "We're not selling." Drum's expression hardened. "Don't be foolish, old man. The Petersons said the same thing last week. Now their place is ashes, and they're heading back east with nothing but the clothes on their backs." Andrew's blood ran cold at the casual admission of arson. These men weren't just strong-arming, they were destroying lives with impunity. Drum continued, "We'll give you 2 days to reconsider. After that, the offer expires, and we can't guarantee your safety." His eyes drifted to Amelia, who stood partially visible behind her father. The implicit threat was unmistakable. As the riders turned to leave, one of them noticed Andrew. "Who's the stranger, Kincaid? Hired gun." Thomas remained silent. Drum studied Andrew with new interest. "Doesn't matter, one man won't change anything." With a final warning glance, they rode away. Inside, Thomas slumped into a chair. "They burned out the Petersons," he said hollowly. "Good people with 3 young children." Amelia placed a hand on her father's shoulder. "What will we do, Pa?" Thomas straightened. "What we've always done, stand our ground." Andrew paced the small confines of the cabin. "You need help. Is there anyone nearby you can count on?" Thomas shook his head. "Nearest neighbors who might stand with us are the Coopers, 10 miles west, but they've got troubles of their own." "The territorial marshal," Andrew began. Could be weeks away, Thomas finished. And Wallace has friends in Helena, money talks. Andrew struggled with an unfamiliar impulse. Every instinct honed over years of survival told him to saddle up and ride out. This wasn't his fight, and staying meant risking everything for people he barely knew, yet the thought of leaving them to face Drum's gang alone sat like a stone in his gut. "I'll stay," he heard himself say. "At least until this is settled." Amelia's eyes widened in surprise, then softened with something that might have been understanding. "You don't have to do that, Mr. Thorne." "Andrew," he corrected. "And yes, I do." The next 2 days passed in tense preparation. They reinforced windows, stockpiled water, and positioned firearms at strategic points around the cabin. Thomas rode to the Rocking M to explain Andrew's absence to McAllister and to request any assistance the rancher might provide. He returned alone but with ammunition and supplies. "McAllister sends his regards," Thomas reported. "Says he can't officially get involved, but he won't report you missing for a while yet." During those days of waiting, Andrew found himself drawn into the rhythm of homestead life. He worked alongside Thomas mending fences, and in the evenings the three of them would sit by the fire, talking of ordinary things despite the threat hanging over them. It was a strange experience for a man accustomed to solitude. More surprising was his growing awareness of Amelia. In unguarded moments, he found himself watching the graceful way she moved, the quiet competence with which she managed household tasks. She was unlike any woman he'd encountered, neither desperate for male attention nor hardened against it. She simply was herself, and that authenticity drew him like a moth to flame. On the evening of the second day, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the prairie in gold and crimson, Andrew finally asked the question that had been nagging at him. "Why did you ask me not to ride east?" "You couldn't have known I'd stay to help." Amelia was silent for a long moment, her profile gilded by the fading light. "I saw something in you," she finally said, "something you perhaps don't see yourself." "And what might that be?" She turned to face him fully. A good man hiding behind a drifter's mask, someone running from connection, not toward freedom. Andrew felt exposed, as if she had peered directly into the carefully guarded chambers of his heart. "You don't know me, Amelia." "Perhaps not fully," she conceded, "but I recognize the look of someone who's lost more than they can bear to lose again." She reached into her pocket and withdrew a small, worn photograph. "This was my mother. She died of fever when I was 13. For years afterward, Pa and I barely spoke her name, as if mentioning her might break us completely." Andrew studied the faded image of a woman with Amelia's same clear eyes and gentle smile. "One day," Amelia continued, "I realized that in trying to protect ourselves from the pain of remembering, we were losing the joy of having known her at all." She carefully returned the photograph to her pocket. "I wonder what you're protecting yourself from, Andrew Thorne." Before he could formulate a response, a distant gunshot shattered the twilight calm. They both stood, alert and tense. "That came from the north pasture," Amelia said, already moving toward the door. Thomas emerged from the cabin, rifle in hand. "They're early." "Or it could be something else," Andrew cautioned, though his instincts told him otherwise. They doused lights and took up positions, watching the gathering darkness for signs of approach. An hour passed in tense silence before Andrew spotted movement near the barn. "Someone's trying to get to the livestock," he whispered. Thomas nodded grimly, trying to draw us out. Andrew made a quick decision. "I'll circle around behind the barn. If they're focused on the house, they might not expect someone coming from the rear." "Too dangerous," Thomas objected. "Less dangerous than waiting for them to burn us out," Andrew countered. After a brief argument, Thomas reluctantly agreed. Andrew slipped out the back door, staying low as he made his way through the vegetable garden and around to approach the barn from the shadowed side. He could make out two figures moving near the corral. As he crept closer, their voices became audible. "Just shoot the damn horse," one said. "That'll bring them running." "Drum wants the place intact," the other replied. "Said to scare them out, not damage the property." Andrew drew his revolver, calculating odds. 2 men here, which meant at least 3 others somewhere nearby, probably watching the cabin. He needed to neutralize these 2 quietly. Moving with the stealth gained from years of hunting, he positioned himself behind a water trough. When one of the men passed within arm's reach, Andrew struck. One hand clamped over the man's mouth while the other pressed his gun barrel against the outlaw's temple. "Make a sound and it's your last," Andrew whispered. The man went rigid with fear. The second outlaw, noticing his partner's absence, called softly, "Carter, where'd you go?" Andrew tightened his grip on his captive. "Call him over," he ordered in a harsh whisper, nice and casual. With trembling voice, Carter obeyed. "Over here by the trough." As the second man approached, Andrew shifted his aim and fired. The shot caught the outlaw in the shoulder, spinning him to the ground with a cry of pain. Carter tried to break free in the commotion, but Andrew brought his gun butt down hard, rendering him unconscious. The night erupted into chaos. Shots rang out from the direction of the cabin, and Andrew could hear men shouting. Binding Carter quickly with a length of rope, he dragged the wounded man behind the trough. "How many more?" he demanded. The outlaw grimaced in pain. "Go to hell." Andrew pressed on the man's wound, eliciting a howl. "How many?" "3," the outlaw gasped. "Drum and 2 others there at the front of the house." Leaving both men secured, Andrew worked his way back toward the cabin. The shooting had intensified, with muzzle flashes visible from both the house and the cover of trees at the edge of the property. He needed to circle behind Drum's position, but the open ground offered little cover. Taking a deep breath, Andrew sprinted for a woodpile 20 yards away. A bullet whined past his ear as he dove behind the logs. From this new vantage point, he could see 2 figures sheltering behind an overturned wagon about 50 yards from the cabin's front door. Firelight from within the house silhouetted a third man, must be Drum, crouched beneath a window. Andrew took careful aim at one of the men by the wagon and fired. The outlaw pitched forward with a cry. His companion returned fire wildly, bullets splintering wood around Andrew's position. In the confusion, Drum made a dash for the cabin door. Andrew shifted aim but hesitated, afraid of hitting Thomas or Amelia if they were near the entrance. The hesitation cost him. Drum kicked in the door and disappeared inside. A woman's scream tore through the night, followed by a man's angry shout. Heart pounding, Andrew broke cover, racing toward the cabin. The remaining outlaw by the wagon spotted him and fired. Pain exploded in Andrew's left arm as a bullet grazed his bicep, but adrenaline carried him forward. He returned fire without breaking stride, and the outlaw dropped. At the doorway, Andrew paused, listening. Inside, he could hear Drum's voice, taut with rage. "Drop the gun, Kincaid, or I'll put a bullet in your daughter right now." Andrew eased himself through the doorway, staying low. In the dim firelight, he could see Thomas standing with his rifle pointed at Drum, who had Amelia in front of him as a shield, his gun pressed to her temple. Neither man had noticed Andrew's entrance. "Let her go, Drum," Thomas said, his voice steady despite the fear evident in his eyes. "Put the rifle down," Drum repeated. "I'm taking the girl with me. You'll get her back when you sign over this land." Andrew raised his revolver, but the angle was wrong. Drum was partially hidden behind Amelia, offering no clear shot. He needed to create a distraction. Catching Amelia's eye, he gave a slight nod. Understanding flashed in her gaze. "Now, Kincaid," Drum shouted, his patience clearly wearing thin. Andrew kicked a chair, sending it clattering across the floor. As Drum's head whipped toward the sound, Amelia drove her elbow hard into his ribs. He staggered, his grip on her loosening just enough. Andrew fired. The bullet caught Drum in the shoulder of his gun arm. He howled, dropping his weapon. Thomas lunged forward, tackling him to the ground. In moments it was over. Drum lay bound and cursing, his shoulder bleeding freely. Outside, dawn was breaking over the prairie, casting long shadows through the open door. Thomas looked at Andrew, gratitude and respect in his weathered face. "That's twice now you've saved our lives." Andrew nodded, suddenly aware of the burning pain in his arm. Amelia noticed his wince and immediately set about tending the wound, her hands gentle but efficient as she cleaned and bandaged the gash. "We need to get these men to the marshal in Billings," Thomas said, eyeing Drum with disgust, "and warn the other homesteaders that Wallace's intimidation tactics have failed." Andrew agreed, though his thoughts were elsewhere. The night's events had revealed something to him, something he'd been running from for longer than he cared to admit. When faced with danger, his instinct hadn't been to flee but to protect. The realization was as frightening as it was liberating. The next few days passed in a flurry of activity. Thomas rode to Billings with the captured outlaws, returning with news that the territorial marshal had finally arrived and had issued warrants for Wallace and his remaining men. 2 neighboring homesteaders came to help repair the damage to the Kincaid property, bringing their families for a celebratory dinner once the work was complete. Through it all, Andrew found himself drawn deeper into the rhythms of homestead life. He worked alongside Thomas during the day and sat with Amelia in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing. Each passing hour made the thought of returning to his solitary existence more difficult to contemplate. A week after the attack, Andrew saddled his horse early one morning. Intending to ride to the rocking M, he had responsibilities there, wages to collect and decisions to make. As he adjusted the cinch, Amelia approached, carrying a small package. "For your journey," she said, handing it to him. Inside was bread, cheese, and dried venison. "I'm just riding to McAllister's," he explained. "I'll be back by sundown." Her expression remained carefully neutral. "Will you?" The question hung between them, laden with meaning. Andrew realized she understood him better than he understood himself. She knew his pattern, knew that having discharged his self-imposed obligation, he might simply continue riding west, away from complication, away from vulnerability. "I gave my word to help your father finish the north fence," he said, attempting lightness. Amelia's blue eyes studied him intently. "Is that the only reason you would return?" The directness of her question demanded equal honesty. "No," he admitted, "it's not." She nodded, a small smile touching her lips. "Then I will see you at sundown, Andrew Thorne." Throughout the day, as he settled his affairs with McAllister, Andrew wrestled with the choice before him. The rancher offered him permanent employment, good wages, and a position of responsibility. The smart move would be to accept, to secure his future while maintaining his independence. Yet as he rode back toward the Kincaid homestead in the gathering dusk, Andrew knew that choice was no longer possible. Something fundamental had shifted within him. The wanderer's path, once so clear and appealing, now seemed hollow compared to what he had glimpsed in those few days with Amelia and her father. He topped the rise and paused, taking in the sight of the cabin below, lamplight glowing warmly from its windows. Smoke curled from the chimney, and a figure stood in the doorway, Amelia, watching for his return. In that moment, with startling clarity, Andrew understood what he had been running from all these years. Not attachment itself, but the fear of loss that accompanied it. His father's death had taught him that loving meant inevitable pain. Better to love nothing and no one than to feel that devastating emptiness again. But Amelia had seen through his careful armor. A good man hiding behind a drifter's mask, she had called him. And in her presence he found himself wanting to be that man, wanting to build something that would last beyond the next horizon. As he approached the cabin, Amelia stepped outside, her honey-blonde hair loose around her shoulders. The setting sun cast her in a golden light that took his breath away. "You came back," she said simply. Andrew dismounted, his heart hammering against his ribs. "I did." "And tomorrow," her voice was steady, but he could sense the vulnerability beneath. "Tomorrow I'll still be here," he said, taking a step toward her, "and the day after that. If you'll have me." Amelia's smile bloomed slowly, like a sunrise breaking over the prairie. "I asked you not to ride east," she reminded him softly. "I never said anything about staying west." Andrew closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. "I'm not staying because you asked me to, Amelia. I'm staying because for the first time in my life, I've found something I don't want to leave behind." In the golden light of sunset, with the vast Montana sky stretched endlessly above them, Andrew Thorne finally stopped running. And in Amelia's eyes, he found not the trap he had always feared, but the freedom he had always sought. 3 months later, on a crisp autumn day, Andrew and Amelia were married in the small church in Billings. Thomas gave away his daughter with tears in his eyes and pride in his heart. The ceremony was attended by neighboring homesteaders, ranch hands from the Rocking M, and even McAllister himself, who presented the couple with a fine pair of horses as a wedding gift. That evening, as they stood on the porch of what was now their home, watching the stars emerge one by one, Amelia leaned her head against Andrew's shoulder. "Are you happy?" she asked. Andrew drew her closer, marveling at how completely his life had transformed. The restlessness that had driven him for so long had been replaced by a deeper purpose, to build something enduring with this remarkable woman. "Happier than I ever thought possible," he answered truthfully. "Though I still wonder sometimes why you asked me not to ride east that day." Amelia laughed softly, because I saw something worth keeping the moment you tipped your hat to me by the creek. I needed time to convince you that you were worth keeping too. As winter settled over the Montana plains, the Kincaid homestead thrived under the care of 3 pairs of hands instead of 2. Andrew discovered talents he hadn't known he possessed, for planning, for building, for creating a future beyond the next payday or the next town. And when spring arrived, bringing new calves to their small but growing herd and fresh green to their fields, it brought something else as well, news that their family would increase before the year was out. Standing in the doorway of their home, watching Amelia move about the garden with the subtle roundness of early pregnancy visible beneath her apron, Andrew Thorne finally understood the truth that had eluded him for so long. The frontier wasn't merely a place to survive, it was a place to thrive, to build, to love. And in putting down roots, he hadn't lost his freedom, he had found it.